So this is finally the missing ingredient that gets us looking at HDR onset. And that's real important because the reason that HDR adoption has kind of run into roadblocks along the way is that most of the onset monitoring has been SDR, and then the DPs fall in love with SDR. Then you go in to do the HDR grade and post, and colorists are like, we can't get the DP to embrace this HDR look because they've already fallen in love with the SDR look because it's what they saw. So if we want better HDR adoption throughout the entire pipeline, we need to have people looking at HDR earlier in the process. So we make professional broadcast monitors and color management devices for post-production and production use cases.
Monitors, I understand, but what's a color management device?
So we make these devices called Box.io, and they basically do LUT transforms. So mostly used by DITs on set to do management in like ACES, for example, of different log formats coming in, and then different ODTs going out, and then doing CDLs and creative looks, show LUTs, all within this one LUT box that does these transforms in real time.
Where does it plug in the workflow? Does it connect in front of the monitor or attach to the monitor?
Between the camera and the monitor. So it is a device that sits on the DIT cart typically. And usually there are multiples of them because there's usually multiple cameras on a shoot. And this allows you to do real-time color management. Again, DP comes over and says, I'd like the scene a little bit warmer or cooler or whatever. And the idea is that you then take that content and you bring it to post-production and have that be a starting point for the colorist to work on.
Well, how does the camera video get in there? If the camera's recording on a card or wirelessly, how do we get the video from where it is to where you need it?
So that's a really great question. So what ends up happening is that this camera negative, this OCN, this original camera footage kind of lives separately, right? And all these looks are non-destructive and they exist at the DIT cart, and all this is basically logged via timecode. And so what you end up having is you have this CDL and this lookup table should apply to the footage at this point. And so that's what the DIT is doing. So they are managing all that data, they're sending that footage off, they're sending those CDLs off, but it's a non-destructive process that doesn't bake that look in. It's just an option for post-production to use as a starting point.
So we've talked about that, color management and monitors. And the monitors are mostly HDR now, or are you doing still SDR work?
We do a mix of both, but all of our latest developments have been primarily focused around HDR monitors. And that's kind of the main thing that we've been focusing on lately is expanding our HDR options. So we do everything from now a 26.5 inch all the way up to a 65 inch HDR display. And the beautiful thing is they're all the same type of technology. They're all quantum dot OLED, which is just fantastic in terms of picture quality, portability, all those different types of things that are of interest to people. So
now there's some controversy about quantum dot. We'll get to that in a minute.
Sure.
But first, let's talk about the new stuff. What have you got?
So the biggest one is the 26.5 inch. That's our biggest news. We just announced that. It will start shipping in June. And we think this is kind of the missing ingredient in HDR productions. And the reason for that is that right now you haven't traditionally had a portable HDR reference display for on-set use. So people could bring like a $40,000 behemoth monitor in that weighed 60 pounds and had 4 fans, and it wasn't friendly for on-set use. And then on top of that, these things cost $30,000 to $40,000. So if a crane hits it or somebody runs into it with a C-stand or whatever it is, now you have a $40,000 loss to try to explain, right? So that's not great. So the key thing with our 26.5 inch is 1,000 nit capable reference grade HDR monitor, but this unit is 14 pounds. It can be battery powered, has no fans, so it's completely silent. So this is finally the missing ingredient that gets us looking at HDR onset. And that's real important because the reason that HDR adoption has kind of run into roadblocks along the way is that most of the onset monitoring has been SDR, and then the DPs fall in love with SDR. Then you go in to do the HDR grade and post, and colorists are like, we can't get the DP to embrace this HDR look because they've already fallen in love with the SDR look because it's what they saw. So if we want better HDR adoption throughout the entire pipeline, we need to have people looking at HDR earlier in the process.
Now, you're using the term reference monitor.
Sure.
What does that mean?
So reference monitor has to hit certain benchmarks. It has to do accurate color reproduction. It has to track the EOTFs correctly, like PQ for HDR. It has to hit the correct gamut specifications. The main thing with reference monitors is that they should instill confidence. You should know that your image is accurate because the last thing you want to start doing is chasing your tail on creative looks if you don't know that what you're looking at is even right to begin with, right? So it's real important to have confidence that what you're seeing is the truth and then you can make creative decisions from that starting point.
I got into a long discussion with a reader about a month ago who was trying to figure out how to get perfect color on the user's computer. And I said it's basically impossible.
Yeah, it's difficult.
Because you have no control over the entire distribution chain. So why do we want to use a reference monitor in the first place?
Okay, so that's a great question. And what I love about that question is that it's an important lesson for people to take home, that what happens on the end user devices kind of doesn't matter in a sense, right? So if grandma's TV is very pink compared to the reference, it doesn't matter because she's seeing all that content pink skewed. So you don't want to be the outlier, right? So you're whoever it is with their messed up TV or end user device, their computer that's not calibrated correctly, they are still looking at this content coming from all these different places. You don't want your content to stand out. Like, why does that content look really green compared to everything else? The fact that the end user TV may be skewed very pink sort of doesn't matter because they're used to everything having that pinkish look. What you don't want to do is you don't want to be an outlier because your content is graded very differently from everybody else. So consistency in content creation is important so that when it's viewed in any sort of environment, it kind of meshes with how everybody else has delivered content to that device. So
what I told him was like the old telephone saying, it's okay leaving here.
Yeah.
If we got it okay leaving here, that's the best we can hope for.
That's all you can hope for. And then the other important thing that I think plays into that is, aside from people who might have messed up devices and you just want to have that similarity in the way that you create content with everybody else, is also if you're dealing with someone who's a real videophile and they want to get it right and they want to replicate the reference kind of mastering environment, that they can do that and then get the artist's creative intent perfectly represented at their home as well.
Let's go back to the quantum dot.
Sure.
I was reading an article in Ars Technica about a month ago about perhaps some people using the marketing term quantum dot without actually using quantum dots.
Correct.
What does quantum dot mean, and are you using it properly?
So ours are truly quantum dot. It's not just marketing. So there was that was more in terms of LCD-based devices that also can use quantum dots. And what they found is that they weren't using kind of even a minimal level of quantum dots in those. So very poor marketing. I don't like that people do that. But ours are truly quantum dot. And in our specific application of a quantum dot OLED, what this does is quantum dot OLEDs start as a OLED layer, base layer, for all three subpixels for your red, green, and blue. They all start as blue light, and then the blue is a pass-through because you're starting with blue, so you don't have to color convert it. But then the red and green, what happens is that blue light is absorbed by that quantum dot material, and it basically changes the wavelength. So it absorbs it, and then it re-emits that light at a different wavelength. So it turns it from blue to red and from blue to green. And it's a really neat system that's very, very efficient, allows for very high peak luminance, exceptional off-axis viewing. And so you can go 45, 50, 60 degrees off-axis, and there's virtually no color shift, no luminance drop. So that's another great thing for on-set use, because you might have 3 or 4 people standing around the monitor, and what you don't want to have to do is scoot the DP right in front, because the DP says, oh, it looks green. Well, stand here, sir. Now it looks different. So.
What trends are you keeping your eye on from a development point of view? What can we look for in the future? What should we watch?
So there's a few things. One, I think that there is a desire to go even brighter. Most of our smaller quantum dot units are 1,000 nit capable. We have some of the larger units that are 2,000 nit capable, but there is a desire in the industry to go with 4,000 nit capable displays. And so that's what we're working towards, and that's what our panel suppliers are working towards, to have these brighter and brighter displays. So pushing HDR further, wider color gamuts, brighter luminance, those are things I think we can expect on the display side of things. And then continuing evolving display technologies. Quantum dot OLED, I think, will have several iterations over the next 3, 4, 5 years. Long term, you may see technologies like ELQD, which is another really cool technology, where instead of photons lighting up the quantum dots, you feed electrons directly into it. And that's a really cool technology, but it's not really ready for prime time yet. But in 4 or 5 years, that could be kind of the holy grail of display technologies. So
the big challenge we've got with HDR is we've got to have more pixels. That one's easy. We've got that one covered. Brighter pixels, that one's slowly covered. And more accurate, richer color pixels. And along that, we've got the Rec 2020 spec, which is a long distance from Rec 709. How close are we to achieving full Rec 2020 color space?
So this is like pretty much the main thing that I talk about amongst kind of the color science type community that I deal with on a regular basis, is that we don't necessarily want to go all the way to Rec 2020, because you end up having a lot of problems when you make Rec 2020 capable displays. Laser projector manufacturers have realized this as a problem as well. So in my discussions with people, what most post houses are actually pretty happy with P3 as an operating gamut for monitors. Rec 2020, though, it's so baked into how we encode things that Rec 2020 is not going away. But we really have to start thinking about Rec 2020 as a container. Rec 2020 as a way to encode values that represent color, but not necessarily as a target for display to actually hit.
So we can think of Rec 2020 as like an MPEG-4 container.
Yeah.
That we can put other things in that container, and it may not achieve full Rec 2020 spec.
Yeah.
But it's contained in that master container.
Exactly, and it's a little bit future-proof. So there's all these sorts of like color science type issues that go into Rec 2020, and why we're starting to kind of try to dissuade people from chasing that as this, operating monitor gamut target. That's not really what it should be. It should really all be about encoding in Rec 2020, not necessarily displaying in Rec 2020.
How much of the P3 color space do your monitors hit?
100%. Essentially, most high-end display technologies these days can cover all of P3, which is another reason that I like advising that as the actual operating monitor gamut, because it is quite wide. It's a lot wider than Rec 709, and tons of displays can actually do it. There's no flat panel display that's doing all of Rec 2020. And so that's a problem, because now all these displays are doing different percentages of Rec 2020, which is another reason that it's ill-advised, I think, to use that as a target operating monitor gamut, because everybody's doing a certain different percentage of it. And then you get variability in the way things are represented, which is, again, not what you want in a reference kind of environment.
I should explain that Rec 709 is HD, and Rec 2020 is the ultimate of HDR, but P3 is what most Macintosh monitors are set for.
Well, so yeah, it's really a color gamut specification that's borrowed from digital cinema, right? So the P3 that we talk about there it comes from DCI P3. So it's how all DCP deliverables, digital cinema package deliverables, are always represented in theaters on xenon bulb projectors, essentially in DCI P3 gamut. Rec 2020 is obviously a wider color gamut. Now you can do P3 just as bright, but you're right. When you start talking about it being more colorful and these things as well, you really have to think about these things three-dimensionally, not two-dimensionally. And so that combination of wider gamut and high luminance gives you what's called a larger color volume. So Rec 2020 is certainly a larger color volume overall. But most natural colors that you run into in the world really fit easily within P3.
For people that haven't run into Flanders Scientific, what are some of the key benefits you want them to remember?
So I think one of the biggest things that we've really worked on and that we continue to introduce in every single product that we have is our Gaia Color AutoCal. So it allows you to plug a probe directly into the monitor. You hit a button, and it profiles the monitor, and it profiles the monitor's native behaviors. And you're now calibrated for every possible target. So when you get on set and someone says, oh no, we're actually, everything's being normalized for P3, not for Rec 709, you're not scrambling to recalibrate. You just select the P3 setting on the monitor, and you're done. So that's huge for us, because it gives people confidence. Plug it in, hit go, have it start doing the cal, and go grab lunch, come back, and your monitor's ready to go.
Bram, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.